The abandoned bride's promise. She crossed 1,000 miles of wilderness to marry a man who promised her everything, only to find an empty cabin, a mountain of debt, and a newborn baby crying alone in a wooden box. Evelyn Moore came west searching for a husband. Instead, she found abandonment, betrayal, and a child no one wanted. When a wealthy woman arrives with legal papers to take the boy away, Evelyn must fight for a family she never expected, against an enemy she cannot defeat. This is a story of love forged in fire, and the courage it takes to choose someone else's child as your own. If you're watching, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The stagecoach wheels groaned against the frozen earth as they climbed higher into the Colorado mountains, each jolt sending pain through Evelyn Moore's exhausted body. She had been traveling for 11 days now, by train from Philadelphia, then by wagon through Kansas, and finally by this rattling coach that seemed determined to shake her bones loose from her flesh. She pressed her forehead against the frost-clouded window, watching the pine trees grow thicker, the snow deeper, the world more foreign with every passing mile. In her lap, clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white, lay a letter. The paper was soft now, worn thin from being read and reread until the words had burned themselves into her memory. My dearest Miss Moore, I am a man of simple means but honest heart. I own 40 acres of good land outside of Silver Creek, Colorado, with a cabin already built and waiting for a woman's touch. I am not a young man, 34 years old, but I am strong, hardworking, and ready to build a life with someone who values home and family above all else. I have read your advertisement in the matrimonial paper, and something in your words spoke to me. You wrote that you seek not wealth but warmth, not position but purpose. Miss Moore, I can offer you both. If you will have me, I will send money for your passage. Come west, and let us build something together. Yours with hope, Samuel Crane. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the coach rock her toward something that felt almost like peace. Samuel Crane. She had never seen his face, never heard his voice, but she had read this letter so many times that she felt she knew him. A man who valued honest work, a man ready for family, a man who had chosen her. That last part mattered more than she could ever explain. At 26 years old, Evelyn Moore had spent her entire life being unchosen. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and her father had never forgiven her for it. She had been raised in a cramped apartment above a textile factory in Philadelphia, more servant than daughter, cooking and cleaning for a man who looked through her as if she were made of glass. When he died 3 years ago, she had discovered the truth. There was nothing left. No inheritance, no savings, no future, just debts that swallowed the apartment and everything in it, leaving her with 2 dresses, a pair of worn shoes, and the crushing realization that she was completely alone in the world. She had worked as a seamstress, then as a laundress, then as whatever she could find. She had lived in boarding houses where the walls were thin and the company was rough. She had learned to make herself small, invisible, forgettable. And then, 6 months ago, she had seen the advertisement in a matrimonial paper left behind on a park bench. Seeking a wife. Must be willing to travel west. Character valued above beauty. She had written back, pouring her heart onto the page without meaning to. She had described her loneliness, her hunger for purpose, her desperate hope that somewhere in this vast country there might be a place where she belonged. Samuel Crane had answered within a month. Now, as the stagecoach crested another rise and the town of Silver Creek came into view below, a scattering of wooden buildings huddled against the mountainside like children seeking warmth, Evelyn felt her heart begin to pound. This was it, the end of running, the beginning of something new. She touched the letter one more time, then tucked it carefully into her coat pocket, next to the small velvet pouch that contained everything else she owned in the world. Her mother's wedding ring, a lock of her own hair tied with ribbon, and exactly 43 cents. The coach lurched to a stop outside a building marked Silver Creek General Store, and the driver's voice cut through the cold air. End of the line, miss. Silver Creek. Evelyn gathered her single carpet bag and stepped down from the coach, her boots crunching in the snow. The cold hit her immediately, sharp, clean, nothing like the smoky chill of Philadelphia winters. She could see her breath forming clouds in front of her face. The street was nearly empty. A few horses stood tied to posts, their breath steaming. A man in a heavy coat walked past without looking at her. Somewhere, a dog barked. Evelyn stood there, her bag at her feet, scanning the street for a face she had never seen but somehow expected to recognize. Samuel Crane was supposed to be here. He had written that he would meet her at the general store, that he would be wearing a brown coat and carrying a bouquet of winter berries because a woman deserves flowers, even in February. But there were no flowers, no brown coat, no one waiting. Minutes passed. The cold began to seep through her thin coat, through the wool dress beneath, through her skin and into her bones. She stamped her feet, wrapped her arms around herself, and waited. "You the bride?" The voice came from behind her. Evelyn turned to find a woman standing in the doorway of the general store, middle-aged, with gray-streaked hair pulled back severely and a face weathered by mountain winters. Her eyes were not unkind, but there was something in them that made Evelyn's stomach clench. "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. "I'm looking for Samuel Crane. He was supposed to—" "He ain't here." The words fell like stones into still water. "I'm sorry?" The woman stepped down from the doorway, pulling a shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Name's Martha Webb. I run the store here with my husband." She paused, and something flickered across her face. Pity, maybe, or resignation. "You better come inside. Get warm." "But Samuel, inside first, then we'll talk." Evelyn picked up her bag with numb fingers and followed Martha into the general store. The interior was warm, heated by a cast-iron stove in the corner, and smelled of coffee and tobacco and dried goods. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from flour to fabric to farming tools. A man stood behind the counter, Martha's husband, presumably, but he didn't look up as they entered, busying himself with something that seemed designed to keep his eyes away from Evelyn. Martha guided her to a chair near the stove and pressed a cup of hot coffee into her hands. "Drink that. You look half frozen." Evelyn wrapped her fingers around the cup, grateful for the warmth, but unable to drink. Her throat had closed tight with a fear she didn't want to name. "Please," she said. "Just tell me where he is. Did something happen? Is he hurt?" Martha lowered herself into the chair across from Evelyn, her knees creaking. For a long moment she said nothing, just studied Evelyn's face with those weathered eyes. "Samuel Crane left Silver Creek 3 weeks ago," she said finally, packed up in the middle of the night. "Didn't tell no one where he was going." The words didn't make sense. Evelyn heard them, but they seemed to bounce off her mind like rain off oilcloth. "Left? But he sent for me. He paid for my passage. He said he would be waiting." "I know what he said." Martha's voice was gentle now, the gentleness of someone who had delivered bad news before and knew there was no good way to do it. "I know what he promised, but Samuel Crane was a man who made a lot of promises he couldn't keep." "I don't understand." "He owed money, Miss Moore. A lot of money. To the bank, to the supply company, to half the men in this town. When his wife died—" "His wife?" The word hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She gripped the coffee cup so hard she felt the ceramic dig into her palms. "He was married?" Martha nodded slowly. "Sarah, sweet girl, died in childbirth about 2 months back. Samuel, he didn't take it well, started drinking, stopped working. The debts piled up faster than the snow." Evelyn's mind was spinning, trying to catch up with reality as it shifted beneath her feet. A wife. A death, debts, and somewhere in all of this, a letter promising her a new life. "He sent for me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "After she died, he sent for me to replace her. I reckon he thought a new wife might solve his problems. Someone to keep the house, maybe bring some money or connections from back east." Martha shook her head. "When he found out you was coming with nothing but hope in your pocket, I think he knew it was over. He ran and left me with nothing." It wasn't a question. Evelyn knew the answer already, could feel it settling into her chest like a cold weight. "He left everyone with nothing," Martha said. "The cabin's still there. His land, too. But there's liens against it. Bank'll probably take it come spring." Evelyn sat very still. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. She had crossed 1,000 miles. She had spent every cent she'd saved on supplies for the journey, Things Samuel had told her to bring: fabric for curtains, seeds for a garden, a good cast iron pan. She had left behind her few remaining connections in Philadelphia, burned bridges with the boarding house that had tolerated her, resigned from the laundry job that had barely kept her alive. She had done all of this for a man who had never existed. Not really. The Samuel Crane who wrote those letters, the honest, hard-working man ready to build a future, that man was a fiction. A fairy tale told by a desperate drunk looking for someone to save him. And now she was stranded in a mountain town in Colorado, with 43 cents to her name and nowhere in the world to go. "Miss Moore?" Martha's voice reached her through a fog. "Evelyn," she said automatically. "My name is Evelyn." "Evelyn." Martha leaned forward, her rough hands clasped together. "I'm real sorry, truly I am. This ain't right, what he did to you. It ain't right at all." "No." Evelyn set down the coffee cup with careful precision. Her hands weren't shaking. She wouldn't let them shake. "No, it isn't." "You got family back east? Someone who could send money for your passage home?" Home. The word was almost laughable. She had no home. She never had. "No," Evelyn said. "There's no one." Martha exchanged a look with her husband, who had finally looked up from his pretend work behind the counter. Some silent communication passed between them. "You can stay with us tonight," Martha said. "We got a spare room. It ain't much, but it's warm. I can pay." The words came out sharp, defensive. "I have money." 43 cents, enough for maybe one meal, certainly not enough for a room. Martha just shook her head. "You keep your money. Tonight's on us. Tomorrow. Well, tomorrow we'll figure something out." Evelyn wanted to refuse, wanted to stand up, walk out into the snow, and keep walking until she either found somewhere to belong or froze to death trying. At least then she would be moving. At least then she would be doing something. But her body was exhausted. Her mind was reeling, and the warmth of the fire had begun to thaw something inside her that made her bones feel like water. "Thank you," she said. Thank you." Martha stood, brushing off her skirt. "I'm going to close up the store early. George, you take Miss Moore upstairs, get her settled. I'll bring up some stew in a bit." George Webb nodded and came around the counter, a thick-set man with kind eyes and a beard going gray at the edges. He picked up Evelyn's carpet bag without asking and gestured toward a narrow staircase at the back of the store. Evelyn rose on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused. "Mrs. Webb?" Martha looked up. "The cabin. Samuel's cabin. What happens to it now?" "Like I said, Bank'll take it eventually. Right now it's just sitting there, falling apart. Snow's probably coming through the roof by now." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Could someone show me where it is? Tomorrow?" Martha frowned. "Why would you want to see it?" "Because he promised it to me." Evelyn's voice was steady now, hard in a way that surprised even her. "He promised me a home, and I want to see what that promise looked like, even if it was a lie." For a long moment, Martha said nothing. Then she sighed. "I'll take you out there myself, first thing in the morning, but don't expect much. There's nothing there worth having." "I know," Evelyn said. "I've learned not to expect anything." She climbed the stairs, following George Webb into the small spare room with its narrow bed and thin quilt and single window looking out over the mountains. When he left, closing the door softly behind him, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. She had traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger, and the stranger had vanished like smoke. She was alone in a town that didn't know her, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a letter full of lies. And somewhere out there, in the mountains, she could see through the frost-covered window, was a cabin that was supposed to have been her future. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter one last time. She read it slowly, letting each word sink in. "Come west, and let us build something together." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her pocket. Then she lay down on the narrow bed, pulled the thin quilt up to her chin, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged her down into dreamless sleep. The morning came gray and cold, with fresh snow falling in soft, silent curtains. Evelyn had barely slept, but she rose early anyway, washing her face with water from the basin and doing her best to make herself presentable. In the mirror, she saw what Samuel Crane must have seen when he received her photograph. A plain woman with brown hair that refused to hold a curl, eyes the color of weak tea, and a face that was neither pretty nor ugly, just forgettable. She had never minded being unremarkable. Being unremarkable meant being overlooked, and being overlooked was safer than being noticed. But standing here now in this tiny room above a general store in the middle of nowhere, she wished, just for a moment, that she was the kind of woman men fought for, the kind of woman who could make a man stay. She pushed the thought away. Self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Downstairs, Martha had laid out a simple breakfast: biscuits, bacon, and more of the strong coffee that seemed to be the lifeblood of this mountain town. Evelyn ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind already reaching ahead to the cabin. "You sure you want to do this?" Martha asked, watching her with worried eyes. "There's nothing out there but heartbreak. I'm sure." "All right then." Martha rose and pulled on a heavy coat. "George, watch the store. We'll be back before noon." The walk to Samuel Crane's cabin took nearly an hour. They followed a narrow trail that wound up through the pines, the snow growing deeper as they climbed. Martha led the way, sure-footed despite her age, pointing out landmarks and warning Evelyn of hidden roots and icy patches. "Samuel cleared this trail himself," she said. "First summer he was here. Said he wanted a path wide enough for a wagon so he could bring supplies up easy. Never did finish it." "How long was he here?" 2 years, give or take. Came out from Kansas after his first wife died. Thought he'd start fresh in the mountains." Martha shook her head. "Some men don't know how to start fresh. They just drag their troubles with them wherever they go." The cabin came into view around a bend in the trail, a small structure built of rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney and a sagging porch. Snow had piled up against the walls, and one of the windows was covered with a piece of canvas that flapped in the wind. Evelyn stopped walking. This was it. This was the home Samuel Crane had promised her. The 40 acres of good land, the cabin already built and waiting. It looked like something that had been abandoned for years, not weeks. "Sarah tried to make it nice," Martha said, coming to stand beside her. "Put up curtains, planted flowers by the porch. But it was always too much for her, too isolated, too hard. And the baby?" The question came out before Evelyn could stop it. She had been thinking about it all night, the wife who died in childbirth, the child who must have been born. Martha's face changed, settling into something complicated and sad. "That's the other thing I need to tell you," she said. "The baby survived. A boy." "Where is he now?" "In there." Martha nodded toward the cabin. "Mrs. Garrett from down in town's been coming up to feed him and change him, but she's got 6 of her own and can't keep it up much longer. Samuel was supposed to be taking care of him, but Samuel had run away. Samuel had left behind not just a mail-order bride, but his own son." Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid beginning to crack. "Show me." They climbed the porch steps, Martha testing each one for rot before putting her full weight on it. The door was unlocked, or rather, the lock had been broken and no one had bothered to fix it. Inside the cabin was dark and cold and smelled of old smoke and something else, something sour. The main room was small, with a fireplace at one end and a kitchen area at the other. A table sat in the middle, covered with dirty dishes and empty bottles. Clothes were scattered everywhere. A woman's shawl hung from a hook by the door, as if waiting for someone to come home. And in the corner, beside the cold fireplace, sat a wooden crate lined with blankets. Evelyn crossed the room without thinking, her heart pounding in her ears. She knelt beside the crate and looked inside. A baby lay there, tiny and wrinkled and so very still. For one terrible moment she thought he was dead. Then he stirred, his face scrunching up, and let out a weak, mewling cry. "His name is Thomas," Martha said from the doorway. "After Sarah's father. She named him right before she—" Evelyn reached into the crate and lifted the baby carefully, cradling him against her chest. He was so light, lighter than she had expected, lighter than any living thing should be. His eyes were closed, but his mouth was working, searching for something. "He's hungry," Evelyn said. "Mrs. Garrett fed him this morning. Should be good for another few hours." Evelyn looked around the cabin, at the chaos, the neglect, the evidence of a man's slow collapse. Then she looked down at the baby in her arms. Thomas, a child who had been born into loss and left behind by the only parent he had. She knew that feeling. She knew it in her bones. "What happens to him now?" she asked. Martha sighed. "There's been some talk of sending him to an orphanage down in Denver, or maybe finding a family willing to take him in. But folks here got their own troubles. Not many can afford another mouth to feed." An orphanage. The word tasted bitter in Evelyn's mouth. She had seen the orphanages in Philadelphia, cold, crowded places where children were treated as burdens to be managed rather than souls to be loved. "I know it ain't ideal," Martha said, "but there ain't many options, unless what?" Martha hesitated. "Unless someone was willing to stay. Take care of him. The bank won't move on the cabin until spring, and there's talk that Samuel's debts might be forgiven if someone was willing to work the land, make something of it. It ain't legal exactly, more like a gentleman's agreement, but it might buy some time." Evelyn looked at the baby again. He had stopped crying, had settled against her chest with a sigh that seemed too heavy for something so small. She thought about the letter in her pocket, the promise of a home, a purpose, a life. She had come west to be a wife. She had failed at that before she even began. But maybe she hadn't come west for a husband at all. Maybe she had come west for something else entirely. "I'll stay," she said. Martha blinked. "What?" "I'll stay. I'll take care of him." Evelyn's voice was steady, certain in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I have nowhere else to go, and he has no one else to care for him. It makes sense." "Evelyn, this ain't a decision to make light. A baby's not like getting a dog or taking in a boarder. He'll need feeding every few hours, changing, watching. He'll need everything all the time." "I know. And the cabin needs work. A lot of work. The roof leaks, the fireplace needs cleaning, the well's probably frozen solid." "I know." Martha fell silent, studying Evelyn with those weathered eyes that seemed to see everything. "You're serious," she said finally. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rattled the canvas over the broken window. The baby stirred in Evelyn's arms. Then Martha nodded slowly. "All right then. We'll need supplies. Milk for the baby, Mrs. Garrett's got a goat she might be willing to sell some. Firewood, food, and you'll need to learn how to care for an infant real quick. I'm a fast learner. You'll have to be." Martha turned toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Samuel's family, there's a sister back east, wealthy woman married to a railroad man. She might come looking for the boy eventually." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "What do you mean, looking for him?" "I mean, he's her blood, her nephew. Folks with money sometimes think that gives them rights to things." Martha shook her head. "But that's a worry for another day. Right now, let's focus on getting you settled, one crisis at a time." She left, her boots crunching in the snow outside. Evelyn stood alone in the cabin, holding a baby who wasn't hers, surrounded by the wreckage of a stranger's broken life. She should have been terrified. She should have been overwhelmed, desperate, lost. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt needed. "It's all right," she whispered to the baby, to Thomas. "I've got you now. I've got you." Thomas opened his eyes for the first time since she'd picked him up. They were blue, the deep, unfocused blue of all newborns, but there was something in them that seemed to see her, really see her. "I know I'm not your mother," she said. "I know I'm nobody to you. But I'm going to take care of you anyway. I'm going to keep you safe and warm and fed, and I'm going to make sure you never feel like no one wants you. Because I know what that feels like, and I won't let it happen to you." The baby made a small sound, not a cry exactly. Something softer. Almost like an answer. Evelyn held him closer and began to look around the cabin with new eyes. Not as a monument to broken promises, but as a project, a challenge, a chance. The fireplace needed cleaning. She would do that first, get the cabin warm. Then the window. She'd need to find something more permanent than canvas. The dishes could wait, but the floor needed sweeping, and somewhere in this chaos there had to be baby supplies, diapers, blankets, something, One thing at a time, one problem at a time. That was how you survived. Evelyn Moore had survived 26 years of being unwanted, overlooked, and alone. She could survive this too. And maybe, just maybe, she could do more than survive. Maybe she could build something. Well, the days that followed blurred together into a rhythm of exhaustion and determination. Evelyn threw herself into the work of making the cabin livable, rising before dawn and collapsing after dark, her body aching with a fatigue she had never known. She learned to build fires that would last through the night, banking the coals just so. She patched the window with oilcloth and stuffed rags into every crack where the wind crept through. She cleared out the debris Samuel had left behind, the empty bottles, the scattered clothes, the plates crusted with old food, and scrubbed the cabin until her hands were raw. And through it all, there was Thomas. The baby was a mystery she was constantly trying to solve. She learned his cries, the sharp, piercing wail that meant hunger, the fretful whimper that meant discomfort, the soft fussing that meant he simply wanted to be held. She learned to warm goat's milk to exactly the right temperature, to test it on her wrist the way Mrs. Garrett showed her. She learned to change his diapers quickly, efficiently, holding her breath against the smell that still made her gag. She learned that he slept best when she sang to him, even though her voice was nothing special. She learned that he liked to grab her finger and hold on tight, as if afraid she might disappear. She learned that his eyes followed her around the room, that tiny face tracking her every movement. She learned, slowly, what it meant to be needed. It was not easy. Nothing about it was easy. There were nights when Thomas wouldn't stop crying no matter what she did, and she walked the floor with him for hours, tears streaming down her own face. There were mornings when she woke up so tired she could barely stand, her body begging for rest she couldn't afford to take. There were moments of doubt so crushing she could hardly breathe, but there were other moments too. The first time Thomas smiled at her, a real smile, not just gas, she sat down in the middle of the floor and laughed until she cried. The first time she managed to get him to sleep for 4 hours straight, she felt like she had conquered a mountain. The first time someone in town called her Thomas's mother, she didn't correct them. Martha Webb became her lifeline. The older woman stopped by every few days, bringing supplies, checking on the baby, offering advice that ranged from practical to philosophical. "You're doing good," she said one afternoon, watching Evelyn rock Thomas by the fire. "Better than I expected, truth be told." "I don't know what I'm doing," Evelyn admitted. "I'm just making it up as I go." "That's all any of us do," Martha said. "You think I knew what I was doing when I had my first? Nearly drowned the poor thing the first time I gave her a bath." She chuckled at the memory. "Babies are tougher than they look, and so are you." Evelyn wasn't sure she believed that, but she appreciated hearing it. As the weeks passed, she began to feel something changing, not just in the cabin, not just in Thomas, but in herself. The brittle defensive shell she had built around her heart was starting to crack. The part of her that had learned long ago not to hope, not to want, not to need, that part was slowly, painfully coming back to life. She found herself talking to Thomas constantly, narrating her day as if he could understand. "Now we're going to sweep the floor," she would say, settling him in his crate where he could watch her. "And then we're going to make some porridge, and you're going to have your milk, and then maybe, if you're very good, we'll go outside and look at the snow." Thomas would gurgle and wave his tiny fists, and Evelyn would smile. She was smiling more, she realized, not because life was easy, but because it had meaning now. Every fire she built, every meal she prepared, every diaper she changed, it all added up to something. Someone needed her. Someone depended on her. Someone was counting on her to keep going. It was the first time in her life she had ever felt essential. One evening, about 6 weeks after her arrival in Silver Creek, Evelyn sat by the fire with Thomas asleep in her arms. Outside, the snow was falling again, soft and silent. Inside, the cabin was warm for the first time since she'd arrived. She looked around at what she had built: the clean floor, the mended window, the shelves she'd organized, the curtains she'd made from an old sheet. It wasn't much, nothing like the homes she had seen in Philadelphia, with their fine furniture and delicate wallpaper. But it was hers. No, it was theirs. "I don't know what's going to happen," she whispered to Thomas's sleeping form. "I don't know if the bank will let us stay." I don't know if Samuel's family will come looking. I don't know if I'm doing any of this right." She paused, stroking his soft hair. "But I know one thing. Whatever happens, I'm not giving up on you. I'm not walking away. I'm not leaving you behind." She thought of her father, the way he had looked through her, the way he had made her feel invisible. She thought of every time she had been passed over, overlooked, forgotten. "You're going to know you're wanted," she said fiercely. "Every single day, you're going to know that someone chose you." Thomas stirred in his sleep, his little hand finding her finger and holding on. Evelyn held him tighter and watched the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the pines. Somewhere in the darkness, a branch cracked and fell. But inside the cabin, everything was still. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn Moore felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She didn't know that the peace wouldn't last. She didn't know that even now, a letter was making its way across the country. A letter from a woman with money and power and very definite ideas about where her nephew belonged. She didn't know that the hardest battle was still to come. But that night, in the warmth of the cabin, she was slowly making into a home, with a child who was slowly becoming her own. That night, Evelyn Moore allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not a husband, not a savior, but a purpose, a reason to keep going. A love she never expected, wrapped in a blanket, sleeping peacefully in her arms. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried up the mountain by a boy from town who looked half frozen and entirely resentful of the errand. Evelyn was outside when he came, breaking ice from the water barrel with a hammer she had found in Samuel's abandoned tool shed, Thomas bundled against her chest in a sling she had fashioned from an old blanket. "Miss Moore?" the boy called out, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. Evelyn straightened, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's me." He thrust an envelope toward her like it burned his fingers. "From back east. Postmaster said it looked important." She took the letter with numb fingers, noting the expensive paper, the precise handwriting, the return address in Boston that meant nothing to her. The boy was already retreating down the trail before she could think to offer him something warm to drink. Evelyn stood in the snow for a long moment, staring at the envelope. Something about it felt wrong, heavy with a significance she couldn't name. Thomas stirred against her chest, making the soft snuffling sound that meant he would be hungry soon. "Let's go inside," she murmured to him. "Get warm first. Then we'll see what this is about." The cabin had transformed over the past 2 months. What had once been a monument to Samuel Crane's collapse was now something approaching a home. Evelyn had scrubbed every surface, patched every hole, organized every corner. She had traded labor for supplies, mending clothes for the women in town, helping Martha at the general store, and slowly accumulated the things she needed. A proper cradle for Thomas, built by the blacksmith in exchange for a month of laundering his shirts. A rocking chair given to her by a widow who no longer needed it. Curtains made from fabric remnants, a rag rug braided from old clothes, a collection of candles that made the evenings feel less lonely. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Evelyn settled Thomas in his cradle, tucking a blanket around him, then sat at the table with the letter. Her heart was beating faster than it should have been. She had no family to write to her, no friends who knew where she was. The only person who had ever sent her letters was Samuel Crane, and he was gone. She broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant, each letter perfectly formed in dark ink. Evelyn read the words once, then again, her blood turning to ice. "Dear Miss Moore, I am writing to inquire about my nephew, Thomas Samuel Crane, son of my late brother Samuel Crane and his wife Sarah. I have recently learned of my brother's disappearance and his wife's unfortunate passing, and I am deeply concerned about the welfare of the child. I understand from correspondence with the Silver Creek postmaster that you have been caring for Thomas in my brother's absence. While I am grateful for your Christian charity in this matter, I must inform you that I intend to travel to Colorado at the earliest opportunity to assess the situation and make arrangements for Thomas's proper care. As his only living blood relative, I have both the legal right and the moral obligation to ensure that my nephew is raised in circumstances befitting his station. I am certain you will agree that a child of the Crane family deserves more than a life of poverty in a mountain cabin. I expect to arrive in Silver Creek within the month, Please ensure that Thomas is well cared for until that time. Sincerely, Mrs. Catherine Hale. Evelyn read the letter a third time, as if the words might change, might rearrange themselves into something less threatening, but they remained the same, polite on the surface, sharp as a blade beneath. His only living blood relative. The legal right. Circumstances befitting his station. She looked at Thomas, who had fallen asleep in his cradle, one tiny fist pressed against his cheek. In the firelight, his face was peaceful, trusting. He had no idea that somewhere in Boston, a woman he had never met was making plans to take him away. "No," Evelyn whispered. The word came out fierce, surprising her with its intensity. "No, you can't have him." But even as she said it, she knew the truth. She had no legal claim to Thomas. She wasn't his mother, wasn't his family, wasn't anything but a stranger who had found him abandoned and decided to stay. In the eyes of the law, she was nothing, and Catherine Hale was everything. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Evelyn's life. She went through the motions of caring for Thomas, feeding him and changing him and rocking him to sleep, but her mind was elsewhere, constantly circling the threat that loomed on the horizon. She told Martha about the letter, and the older woman's face went grim. "I was afraid of this," Martha said. "Catherine Hale. I remember Samuel mentioning her once or twice. Said she married well, lives in some fancy house in Boston. They weren't close. She thought he was beneath her, running off to the frontier like that. But blood's blood. What am I supposed to do?" Martha was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, honey. She's got money, connections. If she wants the boy—" "She doesn't want him." Evelyn's voice was sharper than she intended. "She wants to own him. There's a difference." "Maybe, but the law doesn't always see it that way." Evelyn spent her evenings after Thomas was asleep poring over the few law books she could find, borrowed from the town's schoolteacher, who had a small collection of legal texts from his days studying back east. The language was dense, confusing, full of terms she didn't understand, but the basic principles were clear enough. Blood family had rights. Strangers did not. A child belonged to his relatives, not to whoever happened to be caring for him. And a wealthy woman with lawyers and influence could take whatever she wanted from a penniless mail-order bride who had no legal standing at all. Evelyn closed the books each night with a growing sense of despair. She had survived abandonment, poverty, loneliness. She had rebuilt herself from nothing, created a life in this frozen wilderness through sheer force of will. But she didn't know how to fight this. She didn't know how to win against someone who held all the cards. "I won't give you up," she whispered to Thomas each night, holding him close. "I won't. I'll find a way." But the days kept passing, and she couldn't find one. Catherine Hale arrived in Silver Creek on a cold morning in late March when the snow was just beginning to melt, and the first hints of spring were showing in the muddy streets. She came in a private coach drawn by 4 black horses, accompanied by a driver, a maid, and enough luggage to outfit a small army. Evelyn knew the moment she arrived. The whole town knew. A coach like that hadn't been seen in Silver Creek in living memory. She was feeding Thomas when she heard the knock at the cabin door, firm, confident, the knock of someone who expected to be obeyed. She considered not answering, considered pretending she wasn't home. But what would be the point? Catherine Hale had crossed half a continent to get here. She wasn't going to be deterred by a closed door. Evelyn settled Thomas in his cradle, smoothed her worn dress, and went to face her enemy. Catherine Hale was not what she had expected. In Evelyn's imagination, Samuel's sister had been old, severe, dressed in black like a crow. The woman standing on her porch was perhaps 40, with sharp features and dark hair streaked with gray, wearing a traveling dress of deep blue that probably cost more than everything Evelyn owned combined. Her eyes were the same shade as Samuel's had been in his photograph, pale and penetrating, but where Samuel's gaze had been weak, unfocused, Catherine's was razor sharp. "Miss Moore, I presume," Catherine said. It wasn't a question. "Mrs. Hale." Evelyn was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "Won't you come in?" Catherine's gaze swept over the cabin, taking in the patched roof, the hand-sewn curtains, the general air of poverty that no amount of scrubbing could fully disguise. Something flickered across her face. Distaste, perhaps, or pity. Both felt like insults. "Thank you," she said, and stepped inside. The cabin felt smaller with Catherine in it, as if her presence took up more space than her physical form. She stood in the center of the room, looking around with that assessing gaze, cataloging every detail. "So this is where my brother lived?" she said. I had hoped his letters were exaggerating. "It's modest," Evelyn said carefully. "But it's warm and dry, and Thomas is well cared for." "Thomas?" Catherine's attention shifted to the cradle by the fire. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and looked down at the sleeping baby, her face unreadable. "He has Samuel's chin, and Sarah's coloring, I think." "You knew her? Sarah?" "We corresponded. She wrote to tell me she was expecting." Catherine's voice was cool, controlled. "I sent money for the doctor. Much good it did." She reached down as if to touch Thomas's face, then stopped, her hand hovering in the air. Evelyn watched, her heart pounding, ready to snatch the baby away if necessary. But Catherine just withdrew her hand and turned to face Evelyn. "He's thin," she said. "Is he eating well?" "Goat's milk. He took to it better than cow's milk, and he's started taking a little bit of soft food now, mashed vegetables, porridge." "You seem to know what you're doing." "I've learned." Catherine nodded slowly, still studying Evelyn with those sharp eyes. "You're not what I expected, Miss Moore." "What did you expect?" "Truthfully, some desperate creature looking to profit from my brother's misfortune. A gold digger, perhaps, or a fortune hunter." Evelyn felt a flash of anger but kept her voice level. "I'm neither. I came here to marry your brother. He ran away." "I stayed because Thomas needed someone." "So you claim." "So it is." They stood facing each other across the small cabin, 2 women, both determined, neither willing to yield. The fire crackled in the silence. "I've come to take him home," Catherine said finally. "To Boston, where he belongs. This is his home. This is a cabin in the wilderness. His home is with his family. His family abandoned him." The words came out sharp, cutting. "His father left him in a wooden box to starve. I found him alone, hungry, lying in his own filth. Where was his family then?" Catherine's face tightened. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. You were in Boston, in your fancy house with your railroad husband. You didn't know because you didn't care enough to find out." The words hung in the air between them, brutal and honest. Catherine's eyes flashed with something, anger, maybe, or shame, but she didn't look away. "I'm here now," she said quietly. "Now that it's convenient. Now that there's a child to claim, a Crane heir to raise in circumstances befitting his station." Evelyn's voice was bitter. "I read your letter, Mrs. Hale. I know why you're here. You don't want Thomas. You want a legacy." "You don't know what I want." "Then tell me. Look me in the eye and tell me you love that child. Tell me you've been lying awake at night worrying about him. Tell me his face is the first thing you think of in the morning and the last thing you think of before you sleep." Catherine said nothing. Her jaw was tight, her hands clenched at her sides. "That's what I thought," Evelyn said. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Thomas stirred in his cradle, making a small sound that might have been the beginning of a cry. Evelyn moved automatically, lifting him, cradling him against her shoulder, her body knowing what to do before her mind could think. Catherine watched. Her expression was strange now, softer than it had been before. "You love him," she said. "More than anything." "How? He's not yours. You have no claim to him." Evelyn looked down at Thomas, at his tiny face, his perfect fingers wrapped around a strand of her hair. She thought about all the nights she had walked the floor with him, all the mornings she had woken to his cries, all the moments when his smile had been the only light in her world. "Love isn't about claims," she said. "It's about choice. I chose him. I choose him every day." Catherine was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, less certain, more human. "I didn't come here to be cruel," she said. "I know what you must think of me, the wealthy relation swooping in to snatch away the child you've been caring for. But try to see it from my perspective. Thomas is my nephew, my only connection to the brother I lost. I have a responsibility to him, to make sure he's raised properly, educated, given every advantage. And you think he can't have those things here? Can he?" Catherine gestured at the cabin. You're living on borrowed time, Miss Moore. This land isn't yours. The debts aren't paid. Come spring, you'll have nothing. I'll figure something out. With what? With the 40 cents in your pocket? With the goodwill of strangers? Catherine shook her head. I'm offering him a future, a real future. Tutors, the best schools, connections that will open doors for the rest of his life. Can you offer him that? Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to list all the things she could offer Thomas that money couldn't buy. Love, stability, the knowledge that he was wanted. But the truth of Catherine's words cut deep. She was poor. She was alone. She was fighting a battle she had no way to win. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to be reasonable. I want you to understand that I'm not the villain here. I want... Catherine hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across her face. I want to do the right thing. For Thomas. For everyone. And the right thing is taking him away from the only home he's ever known? The right thing is giving him the best possible life. He has a good life here. He's fed, he's warm, he's loved. For how long? Catherine pressed. What happens when you run out of money? When you can't buy milk, can't afford firewood? What happens when the bank takes this cabin and you're out on the street with a baby you can't care for? Evelyn had no answer. The questions she had asked herself 100 times in the dark hours of the night were being spoken aloud now, and they were just as terrifying in the daylight. Let me take him, Catherine said, her voice gentler now. Let me give him the life he deserves. You can visit, if you like. I won't cut you off from him entirely, but you have to see that this is best. The word hit Evelyn like a slap, best. As if best could be measured in dollars and social standing, as if a child's happiness could be calculated like a business transaction. Get out, she said. Catherine blinked. I'm sorry? Get out of my house. Take your money and your pity and your legal rights and get out. Miss Moore, I said get out. Evelyn's voice rose, sharp with desperation and fury. Thomas began to cry, startled by the sound, and she clutched him tighter, turning away from Catherine. You can't have him. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what you can offer. He's mine, and I won't let you take him. Catherine stood frozen for a moment, her face pale. Then she drew herself up, and when she spoke, her voice was cold again, the vulnerability gone. This isn't over, Miss Moore. I have legal standing. I have resources. I will be consulting with lawyers in Denver, and when I return, I will have the proper documentation to take custody of my nephew. Then I'll fight you. With what? The question echoed in the small cabin, cruel in its simplicity. With what indeed? With nothing. With hope and love and desperate determination, weapons that meant nothing against the machinery of law and money. But Evelyn lifted her chin and met Catherine's gaze. With everything I have. Catherine held her stare for a long moment. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, or grudging respect. Then she turned and walked out of the cabin, her expensive boots crunching in the muddy snow. Evelyn stood at the window, watching her climb into the coach, watching the driver urge the horses forward, watching the carriage disappear around the bend in the trail. Only when it was completely out of sight did she allow herself to sink into the rocking chair, Thomas still crying against her shoulder. Shh, she murmured, rocking him gently. Shh, sweetheart, it's all right. It's going to be all right. But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. The days after Catherine's departure were the loneliest of Evelyn's life. Word had spread through Silver Creek about the wealthy woman from Boston, about her intentions to take Thomas away. People were kind. They had always been kind. But there was a new distance in their eyes, a hesitation. They looked at Evelyn the way you might look at someone drowning, wanting to help but knowing you couldn't. Martha was the exception. She came by more often now, bringing food, offering to watch Thomas while Evelyn tried to rest. Her presence was a comfort, even if neither of them could figure out what to do. There's got to be something, Martha said one evening, watching Evelyn pace the cabin floor. Some way to prove you're fit to keep him. Character witnesses, maybe. People who can say you're a good mother. I'm not his mother. That's the whole problem. You're more his mother than anyone else. Anyone can see that. The law doesn't care what anyone can see. The law cares about blood and money. Martha sighed. The law's a fool then. The law's a fool, Evelyn agreed, but it's still the law. She had written letters to lawyers in Denver, to the territorial government, to anyone she could think of who might help. The responses, when they came, were uniformly discouraging. Without blood relation, without legal adoption, which required the consent of surviving family, she had no standing. Catherine Hale, as Thomas's aunt, had every right to claim custody, every right in the world. Evelyn spent her nights by the fire, Thomas asleep in her arms, trying to imagine a future she could live with. Perhaps she could appeal to Catherine's humanity, beg her to let Evelyn stay in Thomas's life, even if she couldn't be his mother. Perhaps there was some compromise that would allow her to watch him grow, to know he was safe and loved. But every time she imagined handing him over, something inside her screamed in protest. This child was hers, not by blood, not by law, but by something deeper, by the thousands of small acts of care that had woven them together, by the love that had grown in spite of everything, by the simple, undeniable truth that she would die before she let him go. She couldn't give him up, but she couldn't see how to keep him either. It was nearly 2 weeks after Catherine's visit when the fire started. Evelyn smelled the smoke first, sharp and acrid, different from the wood smoke that was such a constant presence in mountain life. She went to the window and saw it, an orange glow in the darkness, down toward town, flames licking up into the night sky. The schoolhouse. The schoolhouse was on fire. Without thinking, she wrapped Thomas in his warmest blanket, strapped him into the carrying sling, and ran out into the night. She wasn't the only one. She could see lanterns bobbing down the mountainside, could hear shouts and the clang of the fire bell from town. By the time she reached the schoolhouse, a crowd had gathered. The building was fully engulfed now, flames roaring through the wooden structure, smoke billowing black against the stars. Men were passing buckets of water in a chain, trying desperately to contain the blaze, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. "Anyone inside?" Evelyn grabbed the arm of a woman she recognized, one of the mothers from town. The teacher got out, but the woman's voice broke. The children, some of them were sleeping upstairs. They were having a sleepover, some kind of special thing. The words dissolved into the chaos of the night. Evelyn pushed through the crowd, Thomas pressed against her chest, trying to get closer, trying to see. That's when she saw Catherine Hale. The Boston woman was standing at the edge of the crowd, her face illuminated by the flames, wearing a nightgown under a hastily thrown-on coat. She must have been staying at the boarding house in town. She must have run out like everyone else when the fire started. Their eyes met across the chaos, and for a moment everything else fell away, the fire, the shouting, the fear. There was only the two of them, two women who had been at war, suddenly united by something larger than their conflict. A scream cut through the night, a child's scream, high and terrified, coming from the second floor of the schoolhouse. Someone was still inside. "We can't get to them," one of the men shouted. "The stairs are gone." Evelyn moved before she could think. She thrust Thomas into the arms of the woman beside her. "Hold him! Don't let go!" and ran toward the building, her eyes scanning the structure for any way inside. There was a ladder, she saw, propped against the side of the building, probably used for repairs. The fire hadn't reached that wall yet. If she could get up there, if she could get to the window. She was halfway up the ladder when she realized Catherine was climbing right behind her. "What are you doing?" Evelyn shouted over the roar of the flames. "Same thing you are," Catherine shouted back. "Keep moving!" The heat was intense, pressing against Evelyn's skin like a physical force. The smoke burned her eyes, her lungs. She could hear the building groaning, could feel the ladder shaking beneath her, but she kept climbing, hand over hand, until she reached the second-floor window. Inside, she could see them, 3 children huddled in the corner of what must have been the teachers' quarters, their faces streaked with soot and tears. The floor between them and the window was a lake of fire. "I need something to bridge the gap!" Evelyn screamed down. Catherine was beside her now, balanced on the ladder, her face grimly determined. Without a word, she stripped off her coat and threw it down to the men below. "A plank! A board! Anything!" Seconds later, a length of wood was passed up, a shelf maybe, or a piece of furniture, long enough to span the gap if they were careful. Evelyn grabbed one end, Catherine grabbed the other. Together they maneuvered it through the window, creating a narrow bridge across the burning floor. Come on, Evelyn called to the children. One at a time. You can do this. The oldest child went first, a boy of maybe 8, crawling across the plank on hands and knees. His face was white with terror, but he made it, tumbling into Evelyn's arms. She passed him down to the men waiting below and turned back for the next child. The floor was giving way now, the fire eating through the boards. The remaining 2 children, both girls, younger than the boy, were frozen in place, too terrified to move. I'll go, Catherine said. Before Evelyn could stop her, Catherine was through the window, walking across the plank with her arms outstretched for balance. The wood creaked beneath her weight. The smoke was so thick now that Evelyn could barely see her. But she heard the children cry out, heard Catherine's voice, calm, steady, cutting through their panic. Come with me, right now. Hold my hands and don't let go. One of the girls screamed. A beam crashed down somewhere inside the building, but Catherine's voice never wavered. Right now, we're going home. Evelyn saw them emerge from the smoke, Catherine leading both girls by the hand, walking them across the plank as the floor collapsed behind them. She grabbed the first girl and pulled her to safety, then the second. Catherine was right behind them, her face black with soot, her nightgown singed at the hem. They made it to the ladder just as the wall began to bow. Go, Catherine shouted. Go, go, go. They half climbed, half fell down the ladder, landing in a heap at the bottom, just as the second floor of the schoolhouse collapsed inward with a roar of flame and fury. For a long moment, Evelyn lay on the ground gasping for air, her lungs burning, her hands raw from the ladder. Catherine was beside her, coughing violently. Around them, people were rushing, carrying the children away from the blaze, shouting for water, crying with relief and terror. Evelyn felt hands lifting her, felt someone pressing a cup of water to her lips. She drank without tasting it, her eyes searching the crowd until she found Thomas, still safe in the arms of the woman she had thrust him at, his face confused but calm. The children? She croaked. All safe, someone said. Thanks to you two. Evelyn turned her head and found Catherine's eyes. The other woman was sitting on the ground a few feet away, breathing hard, her elegant bearing completely undone. She looked nothing like the cold, calculating woman who had come to take Thomas away. She looked human, vulnerable, real. You went in, Evelyn said. So did you. You could have died. Catherine let out a sound that might have been a laugh. So could you. You ran into a burning building with a baby strapped to your chest. At least I had the sense to leave mine at the boarding house. You have a child? Had. Catherine's face changed, shadowed with old grief. A daughter. She died of fever when she was 3. The words hung in the smoky air between them. Evelyn didn't know what to say. Sorry seemed inadequate. Everything seemed inadequate. Catherine pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. Her eyes moved through the crowd until they found the 3 children they had rescued, being fussed over by their families. Something in her expression shifted, softened. I used to think, she said quietly, that being a mother was about blood, about biology, about the children you brought into the world. She paused, watching the smallest girl cling to her mother's skirt. But it's not, is it? It's about who you love, who you would die for. Evelyn said nothing. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed, too uncertain of what this meant. Catherine turned to face her fully. In the light of the dying fire, her face was unreadable. You would have died for those children tonight. Children you'd never met. Children who meant nothing to you. They meant something, Evelyn said. Every child means something. Yes. Catherine's voice was very soft. Yes, they do. She held Evelyn's gaze for a long moment. Then she reached out and took Evelyn's hand, not in a handshake, but in something more intimate, a connection, an acknowledgement. I'm going to be in town for a while longer, she said. There are things we need to discuss about Thomas, about everything. Are you still going to try to take him? Catherine didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved to the crowd, to the burned-out shell of the schoolhouse, to the families clutching their children close. I'm going to think about what I've seen tonight, she said finally. And then we're going to talk, really talk, not as enemies, but as 2 women who both want what's best for a child. It wasn't an answer, but somehow it felt like something more important. It felt like the beginning of a different kind of conversation. Evelyn nodded slowly. All right. Catherine released her hand and began to walk toward the boarding house, then stopped. Miss Moore? Yes? You were very brave tonight. I thought you should know that. Before Evelyn could respond, Catherine was gone, disappearing into the smoke and confusion of the night. Evelyn found Thomas, gathered him into her arms, and began the long walk back up the mountain to the cabin. Her body was exhausted, her mind was spinning, and her heart was full of something she couldn't name. She didn't know what the morning would bring. She didn't know what Catherine would decide. She didn't know if anything had really changed. But as she climbed the trail with Thomas sleeping against her shoulder, she allowed herself to feel something she had tried to suppress for weeks. Hope. Just a flicker. Just a spark. But sometimes, a spark was all you needed. The morning after the fire dawned gray and cold, the air still thick with the smell of smoke that drifted up from the valley below. Evelyn had barely slept, her body aching from the night's exertions, her mind unable to quiet itself. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames. She saw Catherine Hale walking across that burning plank, calm as death itself, reaching for children she had never met. She saw something she hadn't expected to see in the woman who had come to take Thomas away. Courage. Thomas woke early, fussing with the kind of determined unhappiness that meant he would not be soothed by anything less than breakfast and undivided attention. Evelyn went through the motions automatically, warming milk, changing his diaper, settling him in the crook of her arm while he ate. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind was elsewhere. She was still sitting by the fire, Thomas drowsy and content against her chest, when she heard footsteps on the porch. Her heart seized. She knew those footsteps, measured, deliberate, belonging to someone who had never learned to move quietly because the world had always made room for her. Catherine Hale. Evelyn didn't get up. She sat in the rocking chair, Thomas in her arms, and waited. The knock came, softer than it had been before, almost hesitant, and still she didn't move. "It's open," she called. The door swung inward, and Catherine stepped inside. She looked nothing like the elegant woman who had arrived in Silver Creek weeks ago. Her hair was pulled back loosely, escaping from its pins. Her dress was plain, borrowed probably, since her luggage was likely ruined by smoke. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night, and her hands, Evelyn noticed, were bandaged where she must have burned them on the ladder. "May I come in?" Catherine asked. "You're already in." A ghost of a smile crossed Catherine's face. "Fair enough." She closed the door behind her and stood awkwardly in the middle of the cabin, as if she wasn't sure what to do with herself. The confident, commanding woman from their first meeting was nowhere to be seen. "How are they?" Evelyn asked. "The children." "Recovering. The doctor says they'll be fine. Smoke in their lungs, some burns, but nothing that won't heal." Catherine paused. "The town is calling us heroes. I've never been a hero before. I'm not sure I care for it." "It's uncomfortable," Evelyn agreed. "Being seen." "Yes, exactly." Catherine's eyes moved around the cabin, taking in the details she had dismissed so quickly on her first visit. The careful repairs, the handmade curtains, the small touches that transformed a neglected structure into something warm. "You've done a lot with this place." "It needed doing." Samuel never could maintain anything. Not a home, not a marriage, not even himself. Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was something beneath it. Old grief, maybe, or old anger. "I should have come sooner. When Sarah wrote to tell me she was expecting, I should have come then." "Why didn't you?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. She moved to the window and stood looking out at the mountain slopes, her bandaged hands clasped behind her back. "Pride," she said finally. "Stubbornness. Samuel and we didn't part on good terms. He thought I was a snob who had forgotten where we came from. I thought he was a fool who was determined to throw his life away. We were both right, I suppose." She turned to face Evelyn. "I told myself I didn't care what happened to him. I told myself that if he wanted to live like a hermit in the mountains, that was his choice. But the truth is, I was hurt. And I let my hurt become an excuse to abandon my brother." Evelyn didn't know what to say. This confession, so raw and unexpected, had thrown her off balance. I'm not telling you this to gain sympathy, Catherine continued. I'm telling you because you deserve to understand who I am. Not the woman in the letter, not the wealthy relative come to claim what's hers. The real person. She took a breath. The person who failed her brother and is now trying, badly, probably, to make it right. By taking Thomas away from me. That was the plan. Catherine met her eyes steadily. It was a simple plan. Come to Colorado, assess the situation, bring my nephew home to Boston where he could be raised properly. I had it all worked out in my head, and then what? And then I met you. The words hung in the air between them. Thomas stirred in Evelyn's arms, making a small sound, and she adjusted her hold automatically, never taking her eyes off Catherine. I expected to find someone desperate, Catherine said. Someone clinging to a child who wasn't hers because she had nothing else. Someone I could pay off or intimidate or simply overpower. That's what I expected. That's what I prepared for. And instead? Instead, I found a woman who ran into a burning building to save children she'd never met. A woman who has built a home out of nothing through sheer force of will. A woman who loves my nephew so fiercely that she was willing to fight me. Me, with all my money and lawyers and legal rights, with nothing but her bare hands. Catherine crossed the room and knelt beside the rocking chair, bringing herself to Evelyn's level. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. I have been awake all night, she said, thinking about what I saw. Not just in the fire, but in this cabin. The way Thomas looks at you. The way you hold him. The way you speak to him, as if he's the most precious thing in the world. She reached out, her bandaged hand hovering over Thomas's sleeping form. That's love. Real love. The kind that can't be bought, or manufactured, or faked. What are you saying? Catherine's hand dropped. She sat back on her heels, looking suddenly exhausted. I'm saying I was wrong. About you. About what's best for Thomas. About everything. She let out a long breath. I'm saying I came here to take him away, and now I don't know if I can. Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She wanted to believe what she was hearing, wanted to let herself hope, but she had been disappointed too many times to trust easily. Why? She asked. Why the change of heart? Because I finally saw something I should have seen from the beginning. Catherine's voice was steady now, firm with conviction. Being a mother isn't about blood. It's not about money or position or legal documents. It's about showing up every single day for a child who needs you. It's about sacrifice. About putting someone else's needs before your own wants. She gestured at the cabin, at the evidence of Evelyn's devotion scattered everywhere. You've done that. For months you've done that. You had every reason to walk away. No one would have blamed you, but you stayed. You fought. You loved him when no one else would. Her voice cracked slightly. My daughter, when Emily died, I thought I understood what it meant to be a mother. I thought I knew. But watching you, watching how you are with Thomas, I realize I still have so much to learn. Evelyn felt tears prickling at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she was sure. What does this mean? She asked. For Thomas. For us. Catherine rose to her feet, smoothing her borrowed dress. When she spoke, her voice was the voice of a woman who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. It means I'm not going to take him. He belongs here, with you. Anyone can see that. The relief that flooded through Evelyn was so intense it was almost painful. She clutched Thomas tighter, burying her face against his soft hair, letting herself breathe for what felt like the first time in weeks. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There are still complications. Evelyn looked up, the fear rushing back. What kind of complications? Legal ones. Catherine began to pace, her movements restless. I told you before that I have legal standing as Thomas's aunt. That hasn't changed. But the opposite is also true. You have no legal standing at all. If I walk away, if I simply return to Boston and leave things as they are, Thomas will still be legally an orphan. Anyone could come along and claim him. The state could take him. Another relative we don't know about could emerge. So what do? We make it legal. Catherine stopped pacing and turned to face her. I have lawyers. Good ones. We can draw up adoption papers. make you Thomas's legal mother in the eyes of the law. With my support, my testimony that you're the best person to raise him, no judge in the territory would deny you. Adoption. Legal mother. The words swam in Evelyn's head, too big to comprehend. You would do that? She asked. After everything, after coming all this way to take him, you would help me keep him? I would. Catherine's voice was soft. I would, because it's the right thing to do. And because she hesitated, something vulnerable crossing her face. Because I hope you might let me be part of his life anyway. Not as his mother, that's your role, and you've earned it, but as his aunt. Someone who visits, who writes letters, who watches him grow from afar. Evelyn stared at her, this woman who had been her enemy and was now offering her everything she had wanted. Why does that matter to you? Catherine's composure cracked, just for a moment. Because he's all I have left of Samuel, of my family. Because when I looked at him yesterday, I saw my brother's chin in my mother's eyes, and I realized that I don't want to lose that. I don't want to be alone in the world, pretending that blood doesn't matter. She took a shaky breath. I know I have no right to ask. After how I've treated you, after the threats I made, but I'm asking anyway. Let me be part of his life, please. It was the please that did it. That single word, spoken by a woman who probably hadn't said please since she was a child. Evelyn rose from the rocking chair, Thomas still cradled against her. She crossed to where Catherine stood and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. I grew up without family, she said slowly. My mother died when I was born. My father never forgave me for it. I spent my whole life feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, to anyone. She glanced down at Thomas, at his sleeping face so peaceful and trusting. I don't want that for him. I want him to have people who love him, as many people as possible. Catherine's eyes were shining now, tears she was too proud to let fall. If you mean what you say, Evelyn continued, if you really want to be part of his life, not to control it, not to take over, but to love him and support him and help him grow, then yes. Yes, I would welcome that. For his sake, and for yours. Catherine let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Thank you, Thank you. They stood there in the small cabin, two women who had started as enemies and were becoming something else. Not quite friends, not yet, but something built on mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and a love for the same small, sleeping child. There's still the matter of the adoption papers, Catherine said, composing herself with visible effort. I'll need to send word to my lawyers in Boston. It will take time, weeks, maybe months, but we'll make it happen. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I thought I might stay. In Silver Creek, I mean. There's work to be done here. The schoolhouse needs rebuilding, and I have resources that could help. It would give me an excuse to... She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. To spend time with Thomas, Evelyn finished. And with you, if you'll have me. It was such an unexpected offer that Evelyn didn't know how to respond. This woman, this wealthy, powerful woman from Boston, wanted to stay in a tiny mountain town, sleeping in a boarding house, just to be near a nephew she had never known and a mail-order bride she had tried to destroy. The boarding house isn't very comfortable, Evelyn said finally. Martha tells me the beds are like sleeping on rocks. I've noticed. And the food is worse. Also noticed. Evelyn looked around the cabin, at the small space she had worked so hard to make into a home. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, really, if you counted the lean-to she had converted into a bedroom. But it was warm, and it was hers, and there was a certain kind of pride in that. I could use help, she said slowly. With Thomas. With the cabin. Winter's ending, but there's still a lot of work to do before spring. If you're serious about staying... Catherine's face transformed. It was like watching ice melt, the careful composure giving way to something warm and genuine. Are you offering me a place to stay? I'm offering you a chance to earn one. Evelyn smiled, the first real smile she had felt in weeks. I hope you're not afraid of hard work, Mrs. Hale. There's plenty of it around here. Please. Catherine's own smile was tentative but real. Call me Catherine, and no, I'm not afraid of hard work. I wasn't always wealthy, you know. I grew up on a farm in Kansas. I know how to get my hands dirty. Then let's get them dirty together. They shook hands, a firm, formal gesture that felt like the sealing of a pact. Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds, sending pale light streaming through the cabin windows. Thomas woke and began to fuss, and Catherine watched as Evelyn soothed him with practiced ease. "You're very good at that," Catherine said. "Practice. Lots and lots of practice." "Will you teach me? I never got the chance with Emily. She was always so healthy, so independent, and then she was gone, and I never got to learn any of it." Catherine's voice caught. "I've spent so many years being Mrs. Henry Hale, wife of the railroad magnate. I've forgotten what it's like to be Catherine. Just Catherine, who wanted to be a mother more than anything." Evelyn looked at her, this woman who seemed to have everything and had actually lost so much, and felt something shift in her heart. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. "Come here," she said, gesturing Catherine closer. "Hold him, like this. Support his head, keep him close to your body. He likes to feel your heartbeat." Catherine reached out with trembling hands and took Thomas into her arms. The baby looked up at her with those unfocused blue eyes, making a small sound that might have been curiosity. "Hello, Thomas," Catherine whispered. "I'm your aunt. I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you properly." Thomas yawned, apparently unimpressed by this introduction, and settled against Catherine's chest with a contented sigh. Catherine laughed, a real laugh, surprised and delighted, and Evelyn felt something ease in her chest. This was right. This was how it was supposed to be. Not a battle over who owned the child, but a coming together of people who loved him. "He likes you," Evelyn said. "He likes being warm and fed. I'm just a convenient chest to sleep on. That's more than most people get from him. Trust me." They spent the morning together, Catherine learning the rhythms of Thomas's care, while Evelyn went about the business of keeping the cabin running. It was strange at first, awkward, full of silences that neither of them knew how to fill. But gradually, as the hours passed, something began to shift. The silences became comfortable. The awkwardness faded. By the time Martha stopped by with fresh bread and news from town, she found them sitting by the fire together, Thomas passed out in his cradle, discussing the best way to repair the cabin's leaking roof. Martha stood in the doorway, her mouth slightly open, looking between them like she had walked into the wrong house. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked. Evelyn and Catherine exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that passes between people who share an understanding, however new and fragile. "Just planning," Evelyn said. "Catherine's going to help with the spring repairs." Catherine, as in Mrs. Hale, the woman who came to take Thomas away. "The same." Catherine rose, extending her hand. "We haven't been properly introduced. I'm Catherine, and I'm told I have a lot of making up to do." Martha looked at the offered hand, then at Evelyn, then back at Catherine. Slowly, suspiciously, she shook it. "Well," she said, "this is unexpected." "A lot of things are unexpected," Catherine replied. "I find that's usually when life gets interesting." It was a start. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Evelyn had experienced before. She had been alone for so long, had learned to rely only on herself, trust only herself, that having another person in her daily life felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Catherine moved into the cabin's small lean-to, insisting that she didn't need luxury, that she had slept on worse in her youth and would survive. She was true to her word about not being afraid of hard work, rising early, helping with chores, learning to do things her wealth had allowed her to avoid for years. She was not a natural at any of it. She burned bread, overcooked porridge, and once nearly set the cabin on fire trying to bank the coals for the night. She complained about the cold, the isolation, the lack of anything resembling culture or society. She missed her comfortable home in Boston, missed her servants and her social engagements and her easy life. But she stayed. Day after day, she stayed. And slowly, grudgingly, the people of Silver Creek began to accept her. It helped that she had run into a burning building to save their children. It helped more that she was spending her own money to rebuild the schoolhouse, hiring workers from town, and ordering materials from Denver. But what helped most was simply that she showed up every day and did the work. "She's not what I expected," Martha admitted one afternoon, watching Catherine struggle with a particularly stubborn goat who did not want to be milked. "I thought she'd last a week, maybe 2. But here she is, still at it. She's stubborn, Evelyn said. More stubborn than I gave her credit for. Takes one to know one, Evelyn laughed. I suppose it does. The adoption papers arrived from Boston in early May, carried by a lawyer who looked deeply uncomfortable to be so far from civilization. He was a small, precise man named Mr. Whitfield, with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose and a habit of clearing his throat before every sentence. The documents are quite straightforward, he said, spreading them across the table in Martha's store, which had become the unofficial meeting place for anything requiring more space than the cabin could provide. Mrs. Hale has agreed to relinquish any claim to the child and to support Miss Moore's petition for legal adoption. Given the circumstances, the child's abandonment, the lack of any other family willing to take responsibility, I anticipate no issues with the territorial court. Evelyn stared at the papers, her heart pounding. It was real. After all the fear, all the uncertainty, it was actually happening. What do I need to do? She asked. Sign here and here and here. Mr. Whitfield pointed to various lines on the documents. Mrs. Hale will sign as witness and will need another witness from the community, someone of good standing. I'll do it, Martha said immediately. Been standing in this community longer than anyone. The signatures were made, the documents witnessed, the papers carefully folded and placed in Mr. Whitfield's leather case for transport to the territorial court. It will take several weeks for the court to process the petition, the lawyer said, but barring any unforeseen complications, you should receive confirmation of the adoption by midsummer. Confirmation. Legal. Permanent. Thomas would be hers. After Mr. Whitfield left, Catherine found Evelyn standing outside the store, looking up at the mountains. The snow was almost gone now, replaced by the vivid green of new growth. Wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the meadows. The world was coming back to life. How do you feel? Catherine asked, coming to stand beside her. I don't know. Evelyn shook her head, trying to find words for the tangle of emotions in her chest. Happy, terrified, grateful. Like I might wake up any moment and find out it was all a dream. It's not a dream. It's real. Is it? Sometimes I still can't believe any of this happened. A few months ago, I was on a stagecoach, coming to marry a stranger. Now I'm adopting a child, rebuilding a cabin, building a life I never imagined. Life rarely goes the way we imagine it will. Catherine's voice was soft. I imagined I would raise Emily to be a young woman, see her married, hold her children. Instead, I buried her before she was 4 years old. I imagined Samuel would outgrow his restlessness, would find his footing, would come home someday. Instead, he's out there somewhere, running from everything he's ever known. She turned to face Evelyn, her expression serious. But here's what I've learned. The life we imagine isn't always the life we're meant to have. Sometimes the unexpected path leads somewhere better than we ever could have planned. Evelyn thought about that, about the letter that had brought her west, the betrayal that had stranded her, the child who had given her purpose. Thank you, she said, for what you've done, for what you're still doing. I know it can't be easy, giving up your claim to Thomas. It's easier than you might think. Catherine smiled, a real smile that transformed her sharp features into something almost warm. I'm not giving him up. I'm gaining a family. You, Thomas, this strange little town in the middle of nowhere. It's not what I expected, but I'm beginning to think it might be exactly what I needed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun move across the mountain peaks. Somewhere in the town below, a child laughed. Somewhere in the cabin behind them, Thomas was napping peacefully, unaware that his future had just been secured by two women who had started as enemies and become something like family. We should get back, Catherine said finally. Thomas will be waking up soon, and I promised Martha I'd help sort the new shipment of supplies. You hate sorting supplies. I hate a lot of things about this place. The cold, the isolation, the complete absence of decent tea. Catherine's smile turned wry. But I find I'm willing to put up with all of it, for reasons I'm still trying to understand. They walked back toward the cabin together, their footsteps falling into rhythm on the muddy path. The world around them was waking up, shaking off the long winter sleep. New leaves unfurled on the aspens. Birds sang in the pines. The creek, swollen with snowmelt, rushed and gurgled its way down the mountain. It was a new beginning. For all of them. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Moore felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The confirmation letter from the territorial court arrived on a morning in late June, when the mountain meadows were thick with wildflowers and the air smelled of pine and possibility. Evelyn was outside hanging laundry when she saw the rider coming up the trail, and something in her chest tightened with a familiar mixture of hope and fear. Every letter, every visitor, every unexpected sound still made her brace for disaster. The months of uncertainty had left their mark, and even now, with everything seemingly settled, she couldn't quite believe that the good fortune would last. But the rider was only young Tom Garrett, Mrs. Garrett's eldest boy, who had taken over mail delivery for the Mountain families as a summer job. He pulled his horse to a stop by the cabin and held out an envelope with the territorial seal pressed into the wax. "For you, Miss Moore," he said. "Looks official." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope with fingers that trembled only slightly. "Thank you, Tom. Would you like some water before you head back down?" "No, ma'am. I got more deliveries, but congratulations, if this is what I think it is." He tipped his hat and was gone before she could ask what he meant. The whole town probably knew what was in this envelope before she did. That was life in Silver Creek. News traveled faster than the wind, and privacy was more concept than reality. Evelyn carried the letter inside, where Catherine was attempting to feed Thomas his morning porridge with more enthusiasm than skill. The baby was now 7 months old, sitting up on his own, babbling in a language only he understood. He had grown fat and happy under their combined care, his cheeks round, his eyes bright with curiosity about everything in the world. "What is it?" Catherine asked, looking up from the porridge-smeared disaster zone that was Thomas's breakfast. "The court." Evelyn held up the envelope. "It has the territorial seal." Catherine went still. Thomas, sensing the change in atmosphere, stopped his babbling and looked between the two women with solemn interest. "Open it," Catherine said quietly. Evelyn's hands were shaking now, badly enough that she had to set the envelope on the table to break the seal. She unfolded the paper and read the words once, twice, 3 times before they sank in. "It's approved," she whispered. "The adoption is approved. Thomas is—" She had to stop, her voice breaking. "Thomas is legally my son." Catherine was beside her in an instant, pulling her into an embrace that was awkward and fierce, and exactly what she needed. Thomas, apparently deciding this was a game, reached out with porridge-covered hands and grabbed at both of them, smearing his breakfast across Evelyn's sleeve. She didn't care. She was laughing and crying at the same time, holding the letter that made everything official, everything real, everything permanent. No one could take him from her now, no court, no relative, no cruel twist of fate. He was hers, and she was his, and nothing would ever change that. "Congratulations," Catherine said, her own voice rough with emotion. "You've earned this, every bit of it." "We've earned it." Evelyn pulled back to look at her. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, you know that." "Nonsense. You were doing fine before I arrived. I was just an obstacle you had to overcome. An obstacle who helped rebuild a schoolhouse and fight off half the territorial bureaucracy." Catherine smiled, that warm, real smile that Evelyn had come to know so well over the past months. "Well, perhaps I contributed a little." They celebrated that night with a dinner that was considerably better than their usual fare. Martha had brought up a chicken, and Catherine had somehow acquired a bottle of wine from the hotel in Denver. The cabin was warm and full of laughter, Thomas presiding over the festivities from his high chair with the pleased expression of a tiny king surveying his domain. "To family," Catherine said, raising her glass. "However we find it." "To family," Evelyn echoed. They clinked glasses, and the sound rang through the small cabin like a bell, clear and bright and full of promise. The summer that followed was the happiest time Evelyn had ever known. The days were long and warm, filled with the endless work of maintaining the cabin and the land. But it was good work, satisfying work. She had planted a garden in the spring, and now it was flourishing, tomatoes and beans and squash, herbs that made the cabin smell like something from a dream. Thomas grew and changed almost daily, it seemed. He learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on the furniture, then to take his first wobbly steps across the cabin floor. His first word was mama, spoken one afternoon while Evelyn was washing dishes, and she had dropped the pan she was holding and scooped him up in her arms, tears streaming down her face. His second word, a week later, was cat. His attempt at Catherine, or possibly an observation about the barn cat that had taken up residence on the porch. Either way, Catherine had pretended not to be moved, but Evelyn had seen her wiping her eyes when she thought no one was looking. The three of them fell into a rhythm, a way of being together that felt natural and right. Catherine handled the household accounts and correspondence, skills she had honed in her years as a society wife. Evelyn managed the garden and the daily tasks of keeping them fed and clothed. They shared the care of Thomas, passing him between them with the easy coordination of partners who had learned each other's rhythms. It wasn't always smooth. They argued about how much to spend on supplies, about whether Thomas needed shoes yet, about whose turn it was to deal with the temperamental chimney. Catherine still struggled with roughing it, still complained about the lack of culture and company, still missed the life she had left behind. But she stayed. Every day she stayed. "I've been thinking," Catherine said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Thomas was asleep inside, and the world was quiet except for the evening birds and the distant rush of the creek. "Dangerous habit," Evelyn said. Catherine ignored the jest. "About what comes next? For you, for Thomas, for all of us." "What do you mean?" "I mean this cabin is fine for now, but Thomas is growing. He'll need schooling eventually. And the land, Samuel's debts are settled, but there's no income from it. You're living on what I give you and what you can grow or trade for." It was true, and Evelyn knew it. She had been avoiding thinking about it, letting herself enjoy the present without worrying about the future. But Catherine was right. The situation wasn't sustainable. "What are you suggesting?" Catherine turned to face her. "I have money, more than I could ever spend. When Henry died, he left me everything, and I've been sitting on it like a dragon on a hoard, not knowing what to do with it." She paused. "Let me invest it here, in this land. We could build a real house, hire help, turn this into something that could support all of us for years to come." Evelyn's first instinct was to refuse. She had built this life with her own hands, fought for every inch of it. The idea of accepting Catherine's money felt like giving up something essential, admitting that she couldn't do it on her own. But then she thought about Thomas, about his future, his education, his opportunities. She thought about the long winters and the hard work and the constant struggle to make ends meet. "It wouldn't be charity," Catherine continued, reading her expression. "It would be an investment, a partnership. We're already partners in raising Thomas. Why not in everything else? And what would you get out of it?" "A home." Catherine's voice was soft. "A family. A reason to get up in the morning that isn't just managing money and attending parties and pretending I'm not desperately lonely." She laughed a little bitterly. "Do you know how many friends I have in Boston? Dozens, hundreds, and not one of them knows me. Not really, not the way you do." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, turning the proposal over in her mind. It was a big decision, the kind of decision that would shape the rest of her life. But as she sat there, watching the last light fade from the mountains, she realized something. She had already made bigger decisions. She had decided to stay when Samuel abandoned her. She had decided to keep Thomas when the world told her she had no right. She had decided to trust Catherine when every instinct screamed to push her away. Those decisions had led her here, to this porch, this moment, this improbable happiness. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid of the future and start building it. "Partners," she said finally, "but equal partners. I won't be your dependent, Catherine. I won't be someone you take care of. If we do this, we do it together." Catherine's smile was like sunrise. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They shook hands on it, there on the porch, as the stars came out one by one above the mountains. It felt like making a vow, solemn and binding and full of hope. The changes came gradually over the following months. Catherine sent for an architect from Denver, a young man with progressive ideas about building homes suited to the mountain climate. Together they designed a house that would be larger than the cabin, but still modest, practical, warm. It would have a proper kitchen, a nursery for Thomas, bedrooms for each of them, and a parlor where they could sit together in the evenings. The construction began in early fall, a crew of workers from town transforming the plot of land beside the cabin into something new. The sound of hammers and saws filled the mountain air, and Thomas, now walking with increasing confidence, spent hours watching the men work, fascinated by the process of creation. It was during this time that the letter arrived. Evelyn was in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes, when Catherine came out of the cabin with an expression that made her stomach drop. "What is it?" Catherine held up an envelope. "It's from Samuel." The name hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Samuel Crane, the man who had promised her a new life and left her with nothing. The man who had abandoned his own son. She hadn't thought about him in months, had let him fade into the past like a bad dream. "Where is he?" "California, apparently. San Francisco." Catherine's voice was tight. "He's been there since he left. Found work on the docks, saved some money. He says—" She looked down at the letter, her jaw clenching. "He says he's better now. He stopped drinking. He wants to come back." "Come back for what?" Catherine met her eyes, and Evelyn saw the fear there, the same fear she felt rising in her own chest. "For Thomas." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Evelyn grabbed the porch railing to steady herself, her vision swimming. "He can't," she said. "The adoption. It's legal. It's final. He can't just come back and claim him. He's Thomas's biological father. He has rights. He gave up his rights when he left, when he abandoned his son in a wooden box and ran away like a coward." "I know," Catherine's voice was strained. "But the law isn't always about what's fair. It's about what can be argued, what can be proven, what a judge decides on any given day." Evelyn felt the familiar panic rising, the terror of losing Thomas that she thought she had put behind her. After everything, the months of struggle, the adoption, the building of this new life. Was it all going to fall apart because Samuel Crane had suddenly decided to play father? "What do we do?" Catherine squared her shoulders, that fierce determination settling over her features. "We fight. Just like before. He wants Thomas? He's going to have to go through both of us." The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and anxious waiting. Catherine's lawyers assured them that Evelyn's adoption was solid, that no court would overturn it without compelling evidence of unfitness. But they also cautioned that Samuel, as the biological father, had the right to petition for custody, and that such petitions, however unlikely to succeed, could drag on for months or even years. The best strategy, Mr. Whitfield advised during his second visit to Silver Creek, is to establish beyond doubt that Mrs. Moore, I should say, now that the adoption is final, is the superior parent. Character witnesses, documentation of the care she has provided, evidence of Samuel's abandonment. If we can paint a clear picture of contrasting fitness, no reasonable judge would consider returning the child to his biological father. "And if the judge isn't reasonable?" Evelyn asked. Mr. Whitfield adjusted his spectacles. "Then we appeal. Again and again, if necessary. Mrs. Hale has the resources to fight this indefinitely." Catherine nodded firmly. "Whatever it takes." But as the days passed and no further word came from Samuel, Evelyn began to hope that maybe the threat would simply fade away. Perhaps he had written the letter in a moment of sentimentality and then thought better of it. Perhaps California had reclaimed him. Perhaps he had found a new life there, a new family, new things to abandon. Then, on a cold afternoon in late October, he appeared at the cabin door. Evelyn was alone when the knock came. Catherine had gone into town with Thomas, leaving her to supervise the construction work on the new house. The workers had left for the day, and the mountain was quiet except for the wind in the pines. She opened the door without thinking, expecting one of the workers who had forgotten something, and found herself face to face with the man whose lies had brought her west. She knew him immediately, though he looked nothing like the photograph she had carried across the country. That image had shown a clean-shaven man with hopeful eyes, a man who looked like he might keep his promises. The man standing before her now was weathered, worn, with a beard streaked with gray and eyes that had seen too much and not liked any of it. "Evelyn," he said. His voice was rough, uncertain. "I mean, Miss Moore." "Mrs. Moore," she corrected, her voice cold. "I adopted your son. He's mine now, legally and in every way that matters." Samuel flinched as if she had struck him. "I know, I got the court notice. That's part of why I'm here." If you've come to take him back, you can turn around right now. You have no claim to him. I know I don't deserve— You're right, you don't. They stood facing each other across the threshold, Evelyn's body blocking the doorway, her heart pounding with a mixture of fury and fear. This was the man who had broken every promise he made to her. This was the man who had left his own child to starve. This was the man whose cowardice had set everything in motion. And now he was here, asking for something she would never give. Please, Samuel said, just let me explain. Explain what? How you ran away and left your son in a box? How you made me cross the country on a lie? How you destroyed your wife and your home and everything you touched because you couldn't face your own failures? Yes. His voice was quiet, broken. Exactly that. Something in his tone made her pause. She looked at him more closely, at the lines on his face, the slump of his shoulders, the hollowness in his eyes. This wasn't a man coming to fight. This was a man coming to confess. 5 minutes, she said, and then you leave. She stepped back and let him enter the cabin. Samuel moved through the space slowly, his eyes taking in the changes she had made. The clean floors, the curtains, the warmth that filled the rooms. His gaze lingered on Thomas's toys scattered in the corner, on the cradle that had been his son's first bed. You've made it beautiful, he said. Sarah would have loved it. Don't! Evelyn's voice was sharp. Don't talk about her like you knew what she would have wanted. I did know her, better than anyone. He turned to face her. I know that doesn't mean anything, coming from me. I know I failed her. I failed everyone. But I did love her, Evelyn, and I loved Thomas. That's why I ran. That makes no sense. I know. Samuel sank into a chair, his body folding in on itself. Nothing I did made sense. I was drunk, grieving, terrified. I looked at that baby and all I could see was Sarah dying. All I could think was that I had killed her, that if I hadn't gotten her pregnant, she would still be alive. I couldn't stand to look at him, couldn't stand to be reminded of what I had done. So you left him to die? I left him with neighbors. Mrs. Garrett was supposed to check on him every day. I gave her money, told her I needed to go into town for supplies. His voice cracked. I kept telling myself I would come back, just one more day, just until I could face it. But one day turned into a week, and a week turned into a month, and by then I was in California, and I had convinced myself that he was better off without me. Evelyn listened, her arms crossed, her face hard. She didn't want to feel sympathy for this man. He didn't deserve it. But something in his story tugged at her, the familiar shape of despair, the spiral of self-destruction that she had seen echoes of in her own father. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand why I came back. Samuel lifted his head, meeting her eyes for the first time. I'm not here to take Thomas. I know I have no right to him. I know you've given him everything I couldn't. I'm here to see him, just once, and to say goodbye. Goodbye? I'm sick. The words were flat, matter-of-fact. Consumption. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, probably less. I wanted to see my son before I die. I wanted to tell him I'm sorry. And then I wanted to disappear again, so he never has to know the kind of man his father was. Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Of all the things she had expected from this confrontation, this wasn't it. She had prepared for a fight, for legal threats, for the same kind of manipulation she had endured from the beginning. She had not prepared for a dying man asking for forgiveness. Why should I believe you? Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Doctor's letter. Diagnosis and prognosis. I'm not lying, Evelyn. I know I've lied about everything else, but I'm not lying about this. She took the paper and read it, her medical knowledge too limited to understand all the terminology, but clear enough on the conclusion. Tuberculosis, advanced stage, fatal within months. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know the truth and to thank you. He stood, steadying himself against the chair. You saved him. When I couldn't, when I wouldn't, you saved him. That's more than I could have ever hoped for. He moved toward the door, his steps slow and careful, and Evelyn found herself speaking before she had decided to. Wait. Samuel stopped. Thomas is with Catherine, in town. They should be back soon. She swallowed hard. If you want to see him, if you just want to see him, you can wait. Samuel turned, his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. Are you sure? No. Evelyn shook her head. I'm not sure of anything. But you're his father, and you're dying, and maybe he deserves to have at least one memory of you that isn't just the story of how you left. Samuel stood very still for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Thank you, he said. I don't deserve it. But thank you. They waited together in awkward silence until the sound of Catherine's horse and wagon came up the trail. Evelyn went out to meet her, explaining the situation quickly while Samuel stayed inside, giving her friend time to process. Catherine's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, suspicion, and finally something that looked almost like compassion. He's really dying. I saw the doctor's letter. It looks real. And he just wants to see Thomas? Nothing else? That's what he says. Catherine looked toward the cabin, her jaw tight. I don't trust him. Neither do I. But Thomas might want to know someday that his father came back, that his father said goodbye. I don't want to take that away from him just because I'm angry. It was the right thing to do. Evelyn knew it was the right thing to do. But watching Samuel hold Thomas for the first time, watching the dying man's face crumple with grief and joy and regret, watching her son, reach up to touch the face of the stranger who had abandoned him. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done. Samuel didn't stay long. He held Thomas for perhaps 10 minutes, murmuring words too soft to hear, tears streaming down his weathered face. Then he handed the baby back to Evelyn, thanked her again, and walked out of the cabin without looking back. She watched him go down the mountain path until he disappeared around the bend, and she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would never see him again. Are you all right? Catherine asked, coming to stand beside her. I don't know. Evelyn held Thomas close, breathing in his familiar scent. I should hate him. Part of me does hate him, but watching him say goodbye to his son, knowing he's going to die alone somewhere, he made his choices. I know, but he's still a person, a broken, terrible, pitiable person. She shook her head. Is it wrong that I feel sorry for him? No. Catherine's voice was gentle. It means you're human. It means you have a heart that can hold more than just anger, even for people who don't deserve it. Evelyn leaned against her friend, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Thomas babbled happily in her arms, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded, completely secure in the knowledge that he was loved. He called me Thomas's mother, she said softly, right before he left. He said, take care of him, mother, like he was giving me his blessing. Does that matter? Evelyn thought about it, about all the ways she had fought for the right to be Thomas's parent, all the legal battles and emotional struggles and sleepless nights. She had never needed Samuel Crane's blessing. She had never wanted it, but somehow having it felt like closing a circle, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Maybe, she said. Maybe it does. The letter came 3 months later from a hospital in San Francisco. Samuel Crane was dead. He had left no possessions, no estate, nothing but a single note addressed to Evelyn and Thomas. She read it alone, late at night, after Catherine and Thomas were asleep. To the woman who saved my son, and to the boy I never deserved, I have no wisdom to offer, no great truths discovered at the end of a wasted life. I only know that I did one thing right. I sent that letter to Philadelphia, the one that brought Evelyn West. I meant it for selfish reasons at the time, but it turned out to be the best thing I ever did. Thomas, if you ever read this, your mother is the bravest woman I have ever known. Not me, not Sarah, but Evelyn, the woman who chose you when she didn't have to, who fought for you when no one else would, who loved you simply because you needed to be loved. That is your legacy. Not my failures, not my weakness, not the blood that runs through your veins. Your legacy is the woman who raised you. Remember that, and you will know everything important about who you are. Samuel Evelyn folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where she kept Thomas's important documents, his adoption papers, his birth certificate, the first lock of hair she had trimmed from his head. Someday, when he was old enough to understand, she would give him this letter. She would tell him the truth about his father, all of it, the good and the bad, the love and the abandonment, the final redemption of a dying man's blessing. But for now, she simply sat in the darkness of the cabin that had become her home, listening to the wind in the pines and the soft breathing of her son, and allowed herself to feel at peace. The new house was finished in the spring when the mountain meadows burst into color and Thomas took his first unsteady steps across the threshold, his small hand clutching Evelyn's finger for balance. He was 18 months old now, with a head full of dark curls and eyes that had settled into a warm brown. Sarah's eyes, Catherine said, though Evelyn had only ever known them as Thomas's own. They moved in on a Sunday morning, carrying their belongings from the old cabin in a procession that felt almost ceremonial. Martha had come up from town to help, along with half a dozen neighbors who had watched the house rise from nothing and wanted to see the family settle into it. There was food and laughter and the particular joy of new beginnings that seemed to hang in the mountain air like a blessing. The house was everything they had planned, and more. The kitchen was large enough for both women to work without bumping elbows. With windows that looked out over the garden Evelyn had expanded during the building months. Thomas's nursery was bright and cheerful, painted yellow at Catherine's insistence because she had read somewhere that yellow was good for children's development. The parlor had a fireplace big enough to warm the entire room and comfortable chairs arranged for easy conversation. But Evelyn's favorite part was the porch, a wide wraparound structure with rocking chairs and a swing, facing west toward the mountains that had become her horizon. She had fallen in love with this view, with the way the light changed across the peaks throughout the day, with the endless sky that reminded her how small her problems really were. "It's beautiful," Martha said, standing beside her as they watched the sunset paint the clouds gold and rose. "You've built something real here, Evelyn, something lasting." "We built it together," Evelyn said, "all of us." It was true. The house might have been funded by Catherine's money, but it had been built by the community. The workers were local men who had watched Evelyn fight for Thomas, who had seen her courage during the fire, who had come to respect her determination. The furniture had been made by Silver Creek craftsmen. The blacksmith had forged the door hinges. The carpenter had built the cradle in Thomas's room. The weaver had created the curtains that hung in every window. This was a house raised by a village, a home created by a family that had chosen each other against all odds. "What are you going to do with the old cabin?" Martha asked. Evelyn had been thinking about that for weeks. The cabin where she had first found Thomas, where she had rebuilt her life from nothing, where she had fallen in love with a child who wasn't hers and become his mother anyway. It felt wrong to simply abandon it. "I want to keep it," she said. "Maybe fix it up properly. Make it available for people who need a place to stay while they get on their feet." "Like you did." "Like I did." Evelyn smiled. "Someone gave me a chance when I had nothing. I'd like to be able to do the same for others." Martha nodded approvingly. "That's a good thought. Silver Creek could use more people like you." "Silver Creek has plenty of good people. It just needs to remember that sometimes." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade. Inside the house, Catherine was reading to Thomas. Evelyn could hear the murmur of her voice through the open windows, the rhythm of words that would become some of Thomas's earliest memories. "I never thanked you," Evelyn said suddenly. "Not properly. For everything you did when I first arrived. You didn't have to help me. You didn't have to take me in, feed me, show me the cabin. You could have turned me away like everyone expected. Now why would I do that?" Martha's voice was gruff, uncomfortable with sentiment. "You needed help. I had help to give. That's just what decent folks do. Not everyone would see it that way." "Then not everyone is decent." Martha turned to face her. "You know what I saw that first day you walked into my store? I saw a woman who had just had her whole world pulled out from under her and who was still standing, still thinking, still planning, still looking for a way forward. That takes something, Evelyn. Something most people don't have." Evelyn felt tears prickling at her eyes. "I didn't feel strong. I felt terrified." Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. Martha reached out and squeezed her hand. "You've done a lot of doing these past 2 years. You should be proud." "I am." Evelyn looked at the house behind her, at the windows glowing warm with lamplight, at the home she had built. "I am proud and grateful and still a little scared, if I'm being honest. Of what? Of losing it. Of waking up one day and finding out it was all a dream. She laughed, a little shakily. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Things will go wrong, Martha said matter-of-factly. That's life. The roof will leak, the crops will fail, people will disappoint you. Thomas will grow up and break your heart in all the ways children do. That's not the question. What is the question? The question is whether you'll still be standing when the storm passes. And I think we both know the answer to that. Evelyn thought about all the storms she had already weathered. Samuel's betrayal, the fight for Thomas, Catherine's arrival, the fire, Samuel's return and death. Each one had threatened to destroy her, and each one had somehow made her stronger. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe she was built for storms. Thank you, she said again, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Don't thank me. Just keep proving me right. The summer months unfolded like a gift, each day bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas was talking now, a constant stream of words and questions and observations that filled the house with sound and life. He had inherited Evelyn's curiosity and Catherine's stubbornness, a combination that kept both women on their toes. "Mama, why sky blue?" he would ask, and Evelyn would try to explain the scattering of light, while Catherine searched through her books for a proper scientific answer. "Auntie Cat, why flowers smell?" he would demand, and Catherine would launch into an explanation of pollination that was far too complex for a toddler, but which Thomas listened to with rapt attention anyway. He called Evelyn Mama and Catherine Auntie Cat, names he had assigned them himself when he first started speaking. The titles felt right somehow, a perfect encapsulation of their roles in his life. Evelyn was his mother, the center of his world, the one who fed him and bathed him and held him when he cried. Catherine was something different but equally essential, a second anchor, a different perspective, a source of wisdom and adventure. "He's going to be brilliant," Catherine said one evening, watching Thomas puzzle out a set of wooden blocks Evelyn had ordered from Denver. "Look at how he's solving problems. That's not normal for a child his age." "He's going to be loved," Evelyn corrected. "That's what matters." Both can be true. They were sitting on the porch, their usual evening spot, watching the sunset while Thomas played at their feet. It had become their ritual, this quiet time at the end of each day, when the work was done and they could simply be together. "I've been thinking," Catherine said, in the careful tone that meant she was about to say something important, "about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Catherine paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've been here for over a year now. When I came, I thought I would stay for a few weeks, settle things with Thomas, and go home. Instead, I find myself reluctant to leave." Evelyn's heart clenched. She had been avoiding this conversation, pretending that the current arrangement could last forever. But she knew better. Catherine had a life in Boston, responsibilities, a world that she had left behind. "Are you going back?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Catherine turned to look at her. "I have nothing there, Evelyn. An empty house, meaningless social engagements, the ghost of a daughter I couldn't save. I've spent the past year living more fully than I have in a decade." She paused. "But I also don't want to impose. This is your home, your family. I'm just a guest who has overstayed her welcome." "You're not a guest," Evelyn spoke before she had fully formed the thought. "You haven't been a guest for a long time." "Then what am I?" Evelyn looked at her, this woman who had come to take her son and stayed to help raise him, who had run into a burning building and fought through legal battles and learned to milk a goat, who had become so woven into the fabric of her daily life that she couldn't imagine it without her. "Your family," she said simply. "You're Thomas's aunt, and my partner, and my friend. This is your home as much as it's mine." Catherine's eyes glistened. "You mean that?" "I mean it. Stay, please. I don't want to do this alone, and I don't have to. We've built something here, something good, something real. Why would we give that up?" For a long moment, Catherine didn't speak. Then she reached out and took Evelyn's hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'll stay," she said, "as long as you want me." "Good," Evelyn squeezed back, "because I don't see that changing anytime soon." Thomas looked up from his blocks, somehow sensing the importance of the moment. "Auntie Cat stay?" he asked, his eyes moving between the two women. "Auntie Cat, stay," Catherine confirmed, her voice thick. Thomas beamed and went back to his blocks. The matter settled in his mind with the easy certainty of childhood. The adults on the porch sat in silence, hands still clasped, watching the stars come out one by one. The years that followed were not without difficulties. There were harsh winters that kept them housebound for weeks, lean times when the garden failed and they had to rely on their savings, illnesses that swept through the valley and left everyone exhausted with worry. There were arguments about money, about Thomas's education, about the 1,000 small decisions that make up a life. There were moments when Evelyn wondered if she had made the right choices, if she was raising Thomas well, if she was worthy of the title he gave her. But through it all, there was love. It filled the house like warmth, like light, like the smell of bread baking in the kitchen on a cold morning. It was in the way Thomas ran to greet them when they had been apart even for an hour, in the way Catherine read aloud every night until her voice grew hoarse, in the way Evelyn sang the same lullabies she dimly remembered from her own mother. They built routines and traditions, rituals that marked the passing of time and gave their lives structure. Sunday dinners with Martha and her family. Annual celebrations of Thomas's adoption day, which they called his choosing day. Autumn trips to Denver to buy books and supplies. Summer picnics in the mountain meadows, where Thomas would run through the wildflowers with the boundless energy of childhood. Thomas grew from a toddler into a boy, curious and kind and full of questions. He learned to read early, devouring books with an appetite that delighted Catherine and sometimes worried Evelyn, who wanted him to play outside as much as he studied inside. He learned to ride a horse, to help in the garden, to do the 100 small tasks that made up life on a mountain homestead. He asked about his father only once, when he was 5 years old. Another child in town had said something, Evelyn never found out exactly what, and Thomas came home with questions in his eyes. "Mama, where is my first papa?" Evelyn had been preparing for this moment for years, but it still caught her off guard. She sat him down on her lap and told him the truth, in terms a 5-year-old could understand. "Your first papa was very sad after your first mama died. He loved you, but he didn't know how to take care of you because he was so sad. So he went away, and I found you, and I loved you so much that I asked if I could be your mama forever." "But where did he go?" "He went far away, and then he got sick, and then he died. But before he died, he came to see you. He told me to take care of you and love you always, and I promised I would." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his small face serious with thought. "Am I sad that he died?" he asked finally. It was such an honest question, so free of the complicated emotions that adults wrapped around grief. Evelyn hugged him closer. "You can feel however you feel," she said. "If you're sad, that's okay. If you're not sad, that's okay too. He was someone who loved you, even though he couldn't show it the right way. And now you have me, and Auntie Cat, and lots of people who love you and show it every day." "I'm not sad," Thomas decided. "I have you." He wriggled off her lap and ran outside to play, the conversation already fading from his mind. But Evelyn sat for a long time in the quiet house, thinking about Samuel Crane, about the man he had been, the father he might have been, the peace he had found at the end. She hoped, wherever he was, he knew that his son was happy. She hoped he knew that his final blessing had meant something. She hoped he had found in death the peace that had eluded him in life. The letter from Samuel stayed in its box, waiting for the day when Thomas would be old enough to read it. But in the meantime, Evelyn focused on giving her son something better than a dead man's regrets. She gave him a living, breathing love that showed up every single day. Thomas turned 6, then 7, then 8. The years passed like water over stones, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm, always moving forward. The house on the mountain became a landmark, known throughout Silver Creek as the Moore Place, though it was home to a Hale as well as a Moore. Catherine's Boston friends eventually stopped writing, their letters tapering off as they realized she was never coming back. She didn't seem to mind. She had found a purpose in Silver Creek that no amount of society functions could provide. She helped establish a library, funded scholarships for promising students, became a patron of the arts in her own modest way. She was no longer Mrs. Henry Hale, railroad widow. She was simply Catherine, Auntie Cat, a pillar of the community. Evelyn grew into her role as a mother with increasing confidence. She joined the school board, advocated for better resources for mountain families, became the person people came to when they needed advice or support. She was still quiet, still uncomfortable with attention, but she had learned that leadership didn't require being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it just required being the steadiest. And always, at the center of everything, there was Thomas. He was a remarkable child, and Evelyn tried not to let that observation go to her head, but it was impossible to ignore. He had a gift for understanding people, for sensing what they needed and finding ways to provide it. He befriended the shyest children in school, stood up to bullies without ever throwing a punch, mediated disputes with a wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. "He gets it from you," Catherine said once, watching Thomas help a younger child who had fallen on the playground. "He gets it from being loved," Evelyn replied. "Children who feel safe can afford to be kind." "Is that a theory?" "It's experience. I know what it's like to grow up feeling unsafe, feeling unwanted. It makes you hard, defensive. Thomas has never had to be hard. He's never had to protect himself from the people who were supposed to love him." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "You've given him a gift, then. The most important one." "We've given him a gift, both of us." On Thomas's 10th birthday, they threw a party that seemed to include half of Silver Creek. The mountain meadow near the house was filled with tables and food and laughing children, the air sweet with the smell of wildflowers and cake. Thomas ran from group to group, his face flushed with joy, accepting well wishes and presents with the easy grace of a child who had been taught that love was abundant, not scarce. When the party finally wound down and the last guests had departed, the three of them sat on the porch together watching the stars emerge. Thomas was between them, leaning against Evelyn's shoulder, his birthday exhaustion finally catching up with him. "Mama?" he said, his voice drowsy. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Did you know you were going to be my mama when you first found me?" Evelyn thought about that long ago day, the broken cabin, the wooden box, the tiny crying infant who had changed everything. She thought about all the fear and uncertainty, all the moments when she had almost walked away. "No," she said honestly. "I didn't know. I was scared, and I didn't have any plans. I just knew that you needed someone, and I was there. But then you stayed. Then I stayed." Thomas was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I'm glad you stayed," he said finally. "So am I." Evelyn kissed the top of his head. "So am I." Catherine reached over and squeezed Evelyn's hand, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had built together. The night was warm, the stars were bright, and the mountain wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. Later that night, after Thomas was in bed and the house was quiet, Evelyn walked to the old cabin alone. She hadn't been there in months. It had been fixed up now, used occasionally by travelers or families in transition, just as she had hoped, but something drew her there tonight. She stood in the doorway, looking at the space where her life had changed. The wooden box was long gone, of course, but she could still picture exactly where it had sat, could still hear the echo of a baby's cry. 10 years. 10 years since she had walked into this cabin expecting nothing and found everything. She thought about the letter that had brought her west, the lies and broken promises, the husband who never was. She thought about Samuel Crane, dying in California, finding redemption in his final moments. She thought about Catherine, arriving as an enemy and staying as family. She thought about Martha and the townspeople, about the fire and the rescue, about all the small moments that had woven themselves together into a life. Nothing had gone the way she planned. Nothing had been what she expected. And yet somehow, it had turned out better than anything she could have imagined. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty cabin, to the mountain, to whatever force had guided her here. "Thank you for giving me a reason to stay." The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the scent of summer and the promise of tomorrow. Evelyn turned and walked back to the house where her family was waiting. The morning of Thomas's departure for boarding school in Denver came too quickly, as all dreaded mornings do. He was 15 now, tall and handsome and achingly independent, and Evelyn had known for years that this day was coming. She had prepared for it, encouraged it, told herself she would be fine. She was not fine. "Mama, stop crying," Thomas said, laughing as he tried to extract himself from her embrace. "I'll be home for Christmas. It's not like I'm going to war." "Let me have this," Evelyn said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "You used to fit in my arms." "I still fit in your arms. I'm just bigger now." Catherine stood nearby, dry-eyed but clutching her handkerchief with suspicious intensity. She had been the one to suggest the boarding school, a prestigious academy that would prepare Thomas for university. And Evelyn knew it was the right choice. Thomas was brilliant, curious, hungry for knowledge in a way that Silver Creek couldn't fully satisfy. He deserved the best education they could give him, but knowing it was right didn't make it hurt any less. "You have everything?" Catherine asked for the third time that morning. "Your books? Your warm coat? The money I gave you for emergencies?" "I have everything, Auntie Cat, I promise." The stagecoach was waiting, the driver patient but impatient, ready to begin the long journey down the mountain. Thomas picked up his trunk. He was strong enough to carry it himself now, another reminder of how much he had grown, and loaded it onto the coach. Then he turned back to them, this boy they had raised together, and Evelyn saw something in his eyes that made her heart swell and break at the same time. "Thank you," he said, his voice serious. "Both of you, for everything, for choosing me and raising me and loving me even when I was difficult." "You were never difficult," Evelyn said. "I was definitely difficult sometimes. Maybe sometimes." She smiled through her tears. "But you were always worth it." Thomas hugged her again, properly this time, the kind of hug that said everything words couldn't. Then he hugged Catherine, who finally broke down and started crying. "Be good," Catherine managed. "Study hard. Write to us." "I will. I promise." He climbed into the stagecoach, his face appearing in the window, and Evelyn memorized it, this moment, this image, her son on the edge of the rest of his life. "I love you, Mama," he called as the coach began to move. "I love you, Auntie Cat." "We love you too," Evelyn called back. "We love you always." The coach rounded the bend in the trail and disappeared from view. Evelyn stood there for a long time, staring at the empty road, feeling the shape of the absence he had left behind. Catherine came to stand beside her. "He'll be fine." "I know. He's strong and smart and kind. He's going to do wonderful things." "I know. And he'll come home for Christmas." "I know." Evelyn finally turned to look at her friend, her partner, her family. "But I'm still going to miss him every single day until then." "So will I." Catherine took her hand. "So will I." They walked back to the house together, leaning on each other as they had for 15 years. The rooms felt too quiet without Thomas's chatter, too empty without his presence. But they were not alone. They had each other, and the memories they had made, and the promise of his return. That evening, Evelyn found Catherine on the porch, looking at the sunset. "Do you remember the first day you came here?" Catherine asked as Evelyn settled into the chair beside her. "How could I forget? You were so determined to take him from me. And you were so determined to stop me." Catherine smiled. "I knew then that you would win, somehow. I just didn't expect to be glad about it." "Are you glad?" "More than I can say." Catherine turned to face her. "I came here expecting to find a child to claim. Instead, I found a family to belong to. That's not a defeat, Evelyn. That's a victory." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, two women who had started as enemies and become something much more. The house behind them was full of memories, of laughter and tears, of arguments and reconciliations, of the 1,000 small moments that make up a life. And somewhere out there, traveling toward Denver, was a young man who carried all of that with him. A young man who knew, bone deep and certain, that he was loved. The letter arrived on a spring morning, 5 years after Thomas left for school. Evelyn was in the garden, her hands in the soil, when she saw the rider coming up the trail. She knew before she opened the envelope what it would say. Thomas was graduating from university, top of his class. He was engaged to be married to a woman he had met in Denver, the daughter of a judge, Catherine reported approvingly, with a sharp mind and kind heart. And he was coming home, with his fiancée, to introduce her to his family. Evelyn read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face, then went to find Catherine. "He's coming home," she said, holding out the letter. He's bringing someone to meet us. Catherine read it and broke into the widest smile Evelyn had ever seen. We'll need to prepare the house and cook something proper. And oh, we should have fresh flowers. Catherine. What? Evelyn crossed the room and pulled her into a hug. He did it. We did it. We raised a good man. Catherine hugged her back, laughing and crying at the same time. We did. Against all odds, we did. They stood there in the house they had built together, holding each other, celebrating the miracle of what they had created. Not just a home, not just a family, but a legacy. A young man who would go out into the world and make it better, who would raise his own children with the same love he had received, who would prove every day of his life that family was about choice, not blood. When Thomas arrived a month later with his fiancée on his arm and joy in his eyes, Evelyn stood on the porch where she had stood so many times before and watched him come home. "Mama," he called, leaping from the carriage before it had fully stopped. "Mama, I'm home." He was a man now, tall, handsome, accomplished, but when he swept her into his arms, he was still her son. Still the baby she had found in a wooden box, alone and abandoned. Still the child she had chosen when no one else would. "Welcome home," she whispered, holding him tight. "Welcome home, my son." That night, after dinner and introductions and hours of catching up, the whole family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset. Thomas and his fiancée, Emily, named, with Catherine's blessing, after the daughter she had lost. Catherine, older now, but still sharp-eyed and full of opinions. And Evelyn, who sat in her rocking chair and looked at the life she had built with wonder and gratitude. "Mama," Thomas said, reaching over to take her hand, "I never asked you this before, but I've been thinking about it lately. What made you stay? That first day when you found me in the cabin, why didn't you just walk away?" Evelyn thought about the question, turning it over in her mind like a stone in her hand. She thought about all the reasons she could give. Duty, circumstance, loneliness, all the practical explanations that made sense but didn't capture the truth. "I stayed," she said finally, "because you needed me, and because I needed you. I didn't know it then, but I had been waiting my whole life for something to belong to. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to build, instead of just survive." Thomas squeezed her hand. "Thank you. For staying, for fighting for me, for everything." "You don't have to thank me. Being your mother has been the greatest honor of my life." The sunset painted the mountains gold and rose, the same colors that had worn the first evening she had spent on this porch, all those years ago. But everything else had changed. The lonely mail-order bride with nothing to her name had become a mother, a leader, a woman surrounded by love. She had crossed 1,000 miles searching for a husband and found something far more precious. She had found a family, not through blood or marriage, but through the most powerful force in the world, choice. And every single day since then, she had chosen them again. The story could have ended differently. A woman with nothing, abandoned in the wilderness, could have given up, walked away, let the winter take her. A child left alone could have died, forgotten. Another small tragedy in a world full of them. But Evelyn Moore had stayed. She had fought. She had loved, and in doing so, she had built something that would outlast them all. A home, a family, a love that would echo through generations. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Evelyn closed her eyes and listened to the voices of her family around her. Thomas and Emily making plans, Catherine offering advice, the mountain wind carrying it all up into the endless sky. She had come west looking for a promise. She had found something better. She had found the truth. That love was not about finding someone to complete you. It was about becoming the person who could give everything to someone who needed it. That family was not about blood. It was about showing up every single day and choosing each other again and again. That home was not a building. It was wherever the people you loved were gathered together. Evelyn Moore had learned these truths the hard way, through pain and fear and loss. But she had learned them, and she had passed them on. That was her legacy. That was her victory. That was her story. And it was exactly the story she was meant to live.